I'm John Nealon with JCN Financial Tax Advisor Group. We're also Strength Science Studios, and we also are John's Dream. So there's three organizations that work together, and we all have the same mission statement, and that is to enable people to have a life they otherwise wouldn't have. How Strength Science Studios was born was just by happenstance. I had a client on an annual review, and I asked him what he does for a living, and he's a trainer. And he says, I said, what kind of training do you do? He goes, well, I do a very specific type of slow resistance training. I said, what does that mean? He described it, and he said, well, it's just one time a week for 30 minutes. What do you think my question was?
Gotta be kidding.
How does that work? I worked out my whole life. You work out 3 times a week. So he gave me a book about it, and I read it and was very intrigued by it. But my real thought was my wife, who had been married to for 34, 35 years at the time. And her daddy died of cardiovascular disease, and I was worried about her health, and she had never exercised. And so I thought, well, you know, even if it barely works, maybe one time a week she goes, it'd be better than nothing. So I kind of harangued or tricked her into going with somebody else to see Mark. And she did it. And she lost like 40 or 50 pounds at first. And then the trainer was going to retire. And I said, golly, what are we going to do? And now my heart started beating fast. So I thought, well, you know what? If we start our own studio and only have one client, and that's my wife, that's a success. So voila, here we are. But you may know this, but in JCN Financial, we're very good at what we do. We do very, very good job with money. Now, how do we do that? How do we make more money than others? How do we minimize risk when others don't? We know something. We study hard, exactly, do our homework. So I did the same thing with Strength Science Studios. I was one of the trainers had given me a brochure of a piece of equipment for sale that she liked a lot, called the Gluteator. What do you think that does, the Gluteator? You're all sitting on the Gluteator, right? So I tracked down one of the principals of the company, Make It. It was a professor with Texas A&M up in Amarillo, Texas. And I was just looking to buy the equipment. But the more I talked to him about this guy, hey, this guy knows something. And what it mattered to me was, well, John, you and I used to work at the gym together at Foxy's. Isn't everybody in the gym an expert? You think about it. Everybody's an expert. Everybody's an expert. But this was the actual scientist had it down. And so I talked to him and was able to get him to join our group to write a newsletter for us and to do a training protocol, help us buy the right equipment. So those of you that are members of Strength Science Studios today, it's going to continue to evolve and change to the dream we have. But I had this notion got me of all these experts. I'll give you a good example. I was at Foxy's. I hurt my shoulder doing a bench press. By the way, if you've ever worked out in a gym, John, is there always somebody there nursing an injury? Somebody's always hurt. They're all experts and always hurt. So I got on the internet and found out that I was doing my bench press wrong. I was always taught to bounce the bar off your chest. We always did in gym class, right? And then I read online, the report said when you do the bench press, you don't let your elbow break the plane of your back. And the reason you don't do that is it puts a pressure on the shoulder. It doesn't help the chest anymore. I've never had a shoulder injury as of yet. Well, I'm in the gym one day doing this exercise, and one guy, Wes goes, John, what you doing? What do you mean, Wes? I'm doing the bench press, man. You ain't doing it right. Wes, let me finish this first, okay? I got up, and Wes was a good bit older than me, and I really got along with him very well. He was very smart. He just knew everything. Everything. So I said, Wes, this is how it works. And then he brought everybody, group me in, surround me at the gym, tell me how wrong I am. I said, look, dude, this is what I'm doing. I said, Wes, why don't you give it a shot? Okay. What he found was that when you don't bounce the bar off your chest, it's harder. So he's struggling. Oh, golly, that's kind of hard, John. I said, well, not only is it hard, you're not going to hurt yourself. So that all played in my mind when I spoke to Jeff, and I really made my mission to make that acquaintance. And so at the end of the day, what we do at Strength Science Studios is different than any other gym here in town. If you're an expert, you need to show your credentials why you're an expert and to validate that. So very, very pleased to introduce Jeff to that end. We also have something that some of you are going to get free today. We're having a drawing in the studio we built a therapeutic massage room. How many have had a therapeutic massage before? Okay, Patty Hurd does my wife's every week. Patty Hurd works for us now. So when you turn in your, may I see the book there? That thing. So whether you're a member of Strength Science Studios or not, if you're a member, still fill out the blue card, okay? Because we're having a drawing at the end of this, and we're gonna give away 4 massages to whoever signs. If you're a guest and want to have a meeting with Strength Science Studios, you can indicate that on there as well. So we're gonna spend about an hour or a little bit more this morning, Jeff is, going over some information that I think is gonna surprise quite a few of you. And if you have a question, by all means raise your hand and ask the question. This is, the first hour was very, very productive, and I think this will be most as well. Why it's so important to me is this. I've done this long enough to where I see people get old. And I see people get old too soon. Jeff will tell you in his presentation, I think slide 26, the number one thing you can do to decrease your aging, halt your aging, or possibly reduce it is to have more muscle in your bones. And I see it in my office, people retire and they become very complacent, and some of them get real old real fast. So there's a decided advantage in the protocol we have here. So any further ado, Jeff Casebold, it's you.
Thanks, sir.
As Jeff's speaking, fill out this card, let me know your comments, what you think about the presentation, and I'll tell you more about our drawing at the end.
Okay, as mentioned, my name is Jeff Casebold. I'm a professor at West Texas A&M. My specialty is strength training and biomechanics. As I was working on my PhD, we had a gentleman walk into our laboratory one day and said, "Would you be willing to test this piece of equipment?" My advisor at the time, "No, we're not interested." And I said, "I don't know. It's my background. I was a strength conditioning coach for years. I was interested. I was piqued my curiosity." So, "Do you mind if I asked my advisor?" I'm like, "Too loud, too not? Am I louder? Okay, give me a second." So I asked him specifically, I'm like, "Can I test it?" And he said, "On your own time." All right, so biomechanically, if you guys, it's where we dress you in all black, skin tight, put those little markers all over your body. You look like kind of a Halloween character. We ask you to do stuff on film, then we model your body in our computers, and then we can start to figure out velocities and forces and all that stuff. That's what I do, okay? So I've got this, I got individuals, I'm testing them, I'm running through, and I'm looking down at the computer. I got EMGs, electromyography, what the muscle's doing. And I went, dang, this guy's onto something. Like something's there. And I'm from a traditional background. So what I'm seeing is counterintuitive to my own brain. It's not making sense to me. And so I'm struggling to rationalize what I'm seeing on these screens. And that's how I got started with Dynavec, and that's how John and I met, is because we're a small operation. We're very, very small, but we make an incredibly effective tool, and to his credit, he was willing to reach out. We started speaking on the phone. This phone conversations kind of continued, and here I am. So thank you for being here. I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to come spend it with us, and then hopefully, if nothing else from this conversation, we pique your curiosity to where you are asking different questions, or you're trying to look at things from a slightly different point of view than the way you have it organized in your brain right now. Everybody okay with that?
Yep.
All right, cool. So I want to redirect the conversation. After I put my presentation together, I saw what was on the website and went, oh, I need to maybe kind of talk about the way things I want to put my spin on stuff. So as I said, I'm from West Texas A&M, not the big campus in College Station. Okay, so we're from the kind of the small sister school. Our school is more about the teaching, and we get into the sciences, but we don't have nearly the toys they have down in College Station. Much different laboratory. Next one on the list, elderly gait mechanics. That's my area of specialty. How people age and how they walk. How they change the way they walk as we age. and looking at the different mechanics of how that takes place. That was my area of specialty as I worked on my advanced degrees. Elderly falls. Indirectly through gait mechanics, the reason that I was studying this is because I want to try to minimize fall potential or try to figure out ways to improve the way someone walks, okay? And that's how I kind of fell into it indirectly. I look at it from the biomechanical point of view. But my background factored into it as well. Why does strength matter? How does strength factor into the two that are right above it, okay? If we change our strength parameters, how does that change the way we function, the way we move? And I just started asking questions along those lines in terms of how do we preserve strength? How do we alter that strength? How do we change the way we walk, or can we minimize falls? And these are things that those are what I researched as I was going forward, okay? My exact dissertation topic was an age comparison. I looked at slope environment versus taking stairs and looked at how we changed or how we evolve when we have to walk up or down those slopes. ADA requirements, all that factored into this. And most of us in this room will take a ramp when we have the opportunity of stairs or a ramp, and that's very normal. But what we wanted to see is kind of how we alter the way we walk when presented the two different opportunities. So I actually worked on a secondary study to this, which actually involved stair climbing versus ramp walking. Everybody okay?
Yep.
All right. So to get into this topic, anytime you hire somebody to teach you about strength training, you're going to hire their entire background, where they come from, what they believe. So I'm going to give you my background so you kind of know where I'm coming from in my approach. And it's not that you've hired me, it's that I'm here to help or here to present my side of the conversation, okay? I'm an educated opinion in this particular. I can back a lot of what I'm about to say with articles and science, but I need you guys to know kind of how I got here so you understand when I present something, you're like, oh, okay, that's why he does it that way. Everybody good? All right. So I suffered a significant injury when I was right out of high school, and it was directly related to my high school football coach not knowing what he was doing. And I know this, and I can state this comfortably, because 3 out of the 4 guys I lifted with through high school all had the same injury post high school. Within 6 months' time of graduation, we all suffered an ACL tear, anterior cruciate ligaments, a knee ligament. But what was funny about me, or what I found out now, what was different about me, I was a big dumb jock at the time, and I needed to go and found this thing called the library. I found out that there's books in there, and you read those books and there's information, and that information is what ultimately changed the course of my life. I found out that I was a competitive individual, that I needed to take all that energy I was putting into sports and I put it into academics. And I went through the painful process of becoming a student, becoming a scholar, and that's what changed the way I looked at things. So very much for me, I wouldn't be here today if I hadn't suffered this injury. But it ultimately, what it did for me is it gave me the framework to get started down this path. Because when my surgeon tells me, you have a muscle imbalance in your body, and that muscle imbalance is so significant that it has changed how your knee functioned, and therefore, as a result, you suffered this injury. Consequently, two more of my friends in a very short period of time were pretty much told the exact same thing from different surgeons. Fair enough? So it cemented in my idea that what are we doing? What's going on here? How am I 18 years of age and I am this dysfunctional? And I found out I'm competitive. It upset me. There's probably a word that starts with P, right? I was pissed. And so what I wanted to do was to say, wait a minute, can I prevent this? Can I change this? Can I come up with different ways to possibly make this happen, not happen? Next thing that happened to me about 30 years ago, I went to a conference. I was in college, and I got invited to go down to a conference in Anaheim, California. I'm from Northern California, so this was an opportunity to kind of get away from the university. And it wasn't a conference that I was anticipating going. So I looked at the schedule and I said, I'm going to go to this one because everything else at that time didn't seem like it was that big a deal and something I wanted to listen. So I went to this one. And the topic on this particular segment that I went to was exercise knows no age. It was presented by a gentleman from San Jose State University. I still remember that. I don't remember his name, but I still remember that. And I'm sitting there just blown away by this concept. I was 20, 21-ish, and I'm like, wait, what? Like, the idea of aging gracefully, the idea of what the research is showing, and I'm like, this is fascinating to me because I had already suffered the injury. I was already struggling with what exercise should be. I was selfish and trying to figure myself out, and then this opened my mind into looking at it from a totally different point of view. And what I really remember from this presentation was at the end of it, he starts showing these pictures of individuals who were 60, 70, 80 years of age with incredible feats of strength. And the pictures were inspiring. They were, it was amazing to watch and witness, you know, being 21 and thinking you got it all figured out. You're looking at it from a totally different point of view now. But the very last picture that he showed was a gentleman from the side who had a significantly large belly, presented the individual. His name was Joe. I still remember that. He was 62 at the time. He had just retired, and he was terminal. They gave him months to live. Get your affairs in order. It's not good for you. And so it kind of changed the whole feel of the room real quickly because there was kind of jovial, laughing a little bit, and then it got real serious. And then as this happens, the house lights turn up. A gentleman from the front row. I'm 21 years of age. Gentleman stands up in the front row. Same Joe. He's now 77. I'm sitting there post-surgery, feeling sorry for myself, and I'm looking at this gentleman thinking, damn, he's got a nice body. He takes his shirt off. He is muscular. And I'm like, that's possible? Like, wait a minute, I need to reorganize this in my head. I need to look at this from a slightly different point of view than I'm currently thinking. And it opened my mind because what happened is Joe was given months to live, and 15 years later, he's not only living, he's living. And he's living well. And he got up and spoke for a little bit. And you'll see a picture of him here in one of these later slides. And that individual, that moment, it significantly changed the way I looked at everything I thought I knew. And it made me question everything I thought I understood. And I started to ask different questions, bigger questions, with the idea of trying to understand science, exercise, life, and moving forward. Okay? So moving on. When about 25 years ago, for whatever reason, I still don't even remember how this happened, I got invited to sit in a room full of doctors with Kaiser Permanente, which is out in California, just sitting in the conference room with them. And everyone spoke. I just sat there and listened. I'm the least intelligent person in the room, and I know it by far. And it gets to my turn, and they ask me what I'm thinking, and I say, can I ask a question? How many of you in this room, as physicians, recommend exercise for your patients? It was unanimous. My next question, my follow-up, how many of you prescribe exercise to your patients? Crickets. I got nothing. I've got blank stares glossed over. And I asked the question, is it possible to prescribe exercise within the Kaiser Permanente structure as a medication? And I got nothing. So I pull open their handbook, because I do my homework now, right? I'm learning to become a scholar. I pull my handbook open, their handbook. I still remember chapter 17, page 269. I hold it up and it says, and I quote, if exercise could be bottled into a pill, it would be considered a miracle drug. That is in their handbook, and I'm getting nothing in return in terms of spitballing ideas to possibly include this concept of exercise as a medication. And yet it's being stated in their documentation. So I walked out of this room going, okay, we know, but we don't implement. Or we know it's good, but we do nothing about it. And so it's one of those things that I was frustrated, and I wanted to understand, how do I contribute to this discussion? My background, my specialty, I was a strength conditioning coach for about 14, 15 years of my life. I worked with athletes. I worked with athletes at the Olympic level, at the professional level, and all the way down to the average individual who walked into the gym. That was kind of my background. When I walked into my PhD program, within a very short period of time of being there, 3 weeks, the entire laboratory's purpose changed, and we went from doing ACL studies on ACL reconstructed knees and looking at balance and strength and all the different parameters. It switched to elderly gait because this thing called money, NIH grant, came in, and now we have to completely shift the focus of the lab. So I was given this amazing opportunity to collect data on an age population that I was unfamiliar with. So here I'm walking in thinking I'm going to do ACL reconstruction, ACL research, already contacted physicians in the area, was already starting to set this up. And then all of a sudden I was given this gift that I was not real happy about. And I'm like, but wait a minute, it's not why I'm here. But it ended up being a really, really, really cool thing in terms of looking back and reflecting. So shifting, we did a lot of gait studies, and that's how I ultimately ended up here today. So who should we listen to? Who are the experts in our particular field? And my field being strength training. Who should I listen to? And this is where it gets really difficult. And thanks to John and to his credit, I've always thought about this, but I had never really put this down on paper to try to understand it at a much deeper level. So most of us turn to our physicians, turn to our doctors. And it's a good place to start. They know a lot about the human body, hopefully. But this is what I found out. Most of your physicians don't take a class on exercise. There's not a single class in medical school that is exercise oriented. It's always alluded to, but it's never actually taught. Okay? And if they had one, it's usually one at most. Okay, and that's just across the board. I'm not trying to throw anybody under the bus. And then I heard a while back, not too long ago, that everything doubles. Every 5 years, the knowledge doubles in medical school. So every 5 years, they're double what they should have known from the previous. So I can't possibly expect them to understand exercise all the way through. I'm not throwing anybody on the bus. But my general rule of thumb, if that doctor that I'm seeing is recommending exercise and they do not exercise themselves, I tend not to listen. That's me. You can do what you want with that. But I tend to go, thank you for the advice, but do you walk your own advice? Do you walk that walk? And that's just me being me. Fair enough? Okay, the other reason that I do this, my mom is terminal. I'm a mama's boy. Mom's terminal. She was getting frustrated with her oncologist. I played the good son. I went with her. And my mom's one of those people that as soon as you start speaking medical, she just glosses over. She doesn't want to hear it. She doesn't want to talk about it. There's no way to get through to her when she gets there. I said, let me go with you, Mom, and let me find out what's going on with this doctor. Let me be there with you. So I'm just the son sitting in this room as the doctor's talking to my mother. And I could see my mom starting to gloss over. And so I kind of interjected and was trying to protect her from the moment. Anyway, as I said, I started to become me. I started asking questions. And I got that the doctor was recommending that my mom exercise. If you know my mom, she's one of the hardest working people you'll ever meet in your life. And she at the time was in her early 60s. And she could probably outwork most people in their 30s. She's just one of those. She's a blue collar, roll up her sleeves, get it done kind of gal. And I said to the doctor, I said, no offense. I said, but take a moment and look at my mother and understand that you're telling someone who is incredibly physical to exercise more. We got to pause for a second and reflect on that. That didn't go over well. It did not go over well. So now I got this lady, this this physician amazingly upset with me. So I'm me. I start asking more questions. And she gets flustered with me to the point of, if I cannot write a prescription, I do not know how to help your mother. And I paused and I said, and that's what's wrong with medicine. And I didn't mean it to be an insult. I just was like, okay, there's more to this than we realize. So with medical doctors, my general rule of thumb, if they're not practicing exercise, I typically don't take exercise advice from them. Everybody okay with that? I know that's disrespectful and I apologize. I'll be polite. I'll treat them as a professional, but I typically will either verify it or back away, and mostly it's from those two stories right there. Moving on. Researchers. Researchers are basically theory-based. I'm a researcher. The difference between me and most of my colleagues or most of the professors that I work with, I cut my teeth in the real world. I existed for 15 years as a professional. I ran my own business, and I have practical experience and theoretic knowledge, which is unusual that I've found. But with researchers, I just want to put this in perspective. There's two governing bodies in the area of strength training. One is the National Strength and Conditioning Association, the NSCA, and the other is the American College of Sports Medicine, the American ACSM. If you want advice on exercise, one or two will probably address your issue pretty well. But here's what happened recently. The NSCA, the National Strength Conditioning Association, just lost a lawsuit for falsification and fabrication of data. So I was a forensic specialist. If I did that in a court of law, I don't work ever again. Because every time I step into a court of law thereafter, that's going to get brought up. So I want to believe I'm an NSCA guy. I'm CSCS, Certified Strength Conditioning Specialist. I want to believe that didn't happen, but it did. So I know that it's true because I can take their textbook and I can start taking apart things where they did not cite things properly. They did not do the job of research like they are supposed to. So there's our second strike against us in terms of who do we listen to. Everybody okay with what I'm doing here? Okay, because what I'm trying to show you is it's difficult to discern who we listen to in this particular profession. Next one, fitness professionals, degrees versus certifications. I'm in the business of degrees. That's what I do. I get people graduated, okay? I've gone as far as creating a certification program on my campus where when people graduate underneath me, they are degreed and they are certified. But I will tell them point blank, you are not qualified. You are certified, but you are not qualified. And qualified, in my mind, is you got to go out there and get some practical experience. You got to go try things out. You got to go play a little bit in this profession before you can actually become qualified. So in the industry of personal training, you only need to have a certification to get a job. You don't need a degree. Now, as a professor of sports and exercise science, physical education, or kinesiology, whatever you want to call us, that's disturbing for me. That means that we're hiring individuals that can literally go take a weekend course, take a test that's true, false, 80 questions, sarcasm, and all of a sudden now you are qualified to work with another human being's body. It bothers me. It bothers me tremendously. So when we start cutting through who our fitness professionals are, they might know all the fancy words, but they don't actually use them correctly. Fair enough? That's my sarcasm right there. So to me, I tell my students all the time, I'll get you a degree if that's what you want. I said, but you're not going to make a difference in our profession unless you understand your role and what you need to do. Because the real education starts after you get the degree. And so that's kind of my approach when I work with my undergraduate and my graduate students. Okay? Next one up here, high school coaches. This isn't necessarily pertaining to this room, but it's something I think it's worth mentioning. I already have a bias based off of my own journey, but here's the deal. This is what we found out, that most of our high school coaches cannot get jobs as personal trainers. They don't meet the minimum qualification of our personal trainers. Now, I'm not trying to throw high school coaches under a bus. All I'm saying is that we went and investigated this to say, what are they doing? What is their knowledge? Where are they coming from? And I'm not trying to be mean. I'm just saying the high school coach is the number one influence on exercise for the rest of our lives. For most of us, okay? They have a tremendous stronghold. Well, my coach said this. Awesome. Let's work with the assumption they didn't know what they're doing for a split second, and then we'll go forward. And to have that conversation with somebody who was a devout follower of that high school coach is incredibly difficult. It's almost to the level, and I'm going to say it, brainwashing. But it's not. It's just they're at a vulnerable point of their life when it made the most amount of sense. So here's what we found out. We actually went and did this research. We found out that 10% of our high school coaches actually met the minimum requirement for personal training, to become a personal trainer. But they have 200% time the influence. So I don't know how to do this. The individual that did the research went into high school coaching. And I told them, I said, we're going to bury this because we don't want people to know that you're the person that's responsible for it, because I want you to get a job. That makes sense? Football, Texas, Panhandle, come on now. You guys know where I'm going with this, right? I didn't want to blackball them before he even had a chance to be there. Okay, so high school coaches. The next one up are college strength coaches. College strength coaches. Quick story. I have 4 of my graduate students who are now working at the college level or higher as strength coaches. My philosophies and a lot of what I am presenting here today is stuff that we are pushing forward to create a movement to understand. The movement that I go with is I want to make sure that I work with your joint stability and then maintain mobility. And it's a very simple concept, and we'll talk on in the next slides. What's interesting about this with you, or what I want you to start to understand, these 4 coaches went ahead and they went forward with this philosophy. They were met with too much resistance. They were met with resistance to the point where their coaches, the other strength coaches, wanted them fired before they even got started. And the irony of that is, I had one gentleman within a year went from a hired strength coach to now the director of strength and development for one particular university. And the reason that he did that is because he had absolutely not a single ACL tear amongst his female athletes, volleyball or basketball. Prior to him, the year before, they had 7 out of 12 athletes. So to go from 7 out of 12 athletes to 0 ACL tears is some indication he might know what he's doing. Okay? And it could have been a fluke, but there's stories that go beyond that. So what we started to do is to look at this idea of strength from a different point of view in a population that is very strength oriented. Okay? Another one of the the individual I'm speaking about, he worked in the college realm and now he's working with the military. He's actually gone on and he's doing strength parameters for the Air Force and looking at injury mechanisms. What makes that interesting to me is that he did this thing called a literature review, back to the library. He did a full lit review on one population, pilots, and one of the injuries they're most likely to sustain, which is low back. Did a full lit review on it. Went to a meeting with the commanders, and after the meeting, he said to the commander, he said, "Can I ask you a couple questions?" "Sure." Boom, boom, boom. Starts running through the questions that were presented in the literature. And the commander looked at my student and said, "How long have you been flying?" "I've never flown a plane in my life." "How do you know this?" "The library." So the idea that this commander was in shock and awe that somebody actually researched a topic that he should know anything about and was highly versed in the topic gave us some indication of how wide open this actually is in this particular realm. Okay, moving on. Who do we normally turn to in a weight room? Friends, family, significant others. I see it all the time. One of my favorites are when boyfriends teach girlfriends how to lift in the weight room. It's a joy for me. It is. Well, why do you do it that way? I don't know. You just do it that way. And I just turn and walk away. I just laugh. And so the idea of if we know somebody and we think they know something, they know more than we do, they're the expert in your world, okay? So they once heard this. What I'm trying to get you to understand is we have a ton of myths that are still in our weight rooms today that I grew up with. They still exist. How do we break those myths? We know they're not true, but we have to break the myth. And that's what I'm trying to get you guys to understand a little bit. So perpetuating from generation to generation to generation is one of the ways, one of the things that I'm really trying to figure out. How do we stop this? How do we get away from some of this nonsense? Okay, the last one, I see this all the time. YouTube is a real thing. And it happens in the weight room more than you realize. I see people in our weight room doing this. And they'll pull up a video and they'll sit down on the machine, they'll watch it, and then they reproduce it. And I watch it happen, and then I'll walk over and throw my 2 cents in there just for giggles, okay? But this has become a reliable source because everything on the internet is true. Sarcasm. All right, moving on. So physically active. Every single one of you in this room knows that physical activity is a good thing. I'm not saying anything out of bounds, right? Everybody in here knows that if you move, it's a good thing. Everybody okay with that? And the reason I do this is because when I come to opportunities like this, I just want to make sure that we know. We know that it's good, okay? Implementing it's a different story. But knowing that it's good is where we want to start. We do know this. I just want to confirm before I move on. Next one. Why is physical activity good for you? Why? Okay, I know it sounds rhetorical, but I actually want to hear what you think or why you think it's good.
Motion is the lotion.
I like it. I've never used that one, but I'll borrow it the first time, and after that it's mine. Motion is the lotion.
I just wrote that down. Use it or lose it.
Use it or lose it. Okay, so what happens when you start investigating why it's good? Each and every one of you have a personal relationship with physical activity. Each and every one of you gravitate towards that physical activity that you enjoy the most. Okay? That's what I want you to understand is that if you don't enjoy it, there's a good chance you're probably not going to do it. Okay? And that we have to start there when we program for people. Because if I tell you this, whatever this is wonderful, but you can't stand it, you're not going to do it. And so I know this going in. And so why is the physical activity good for you? The first thing is you just have to understand what your personal relationship is. Okay? Everybody good there? Yep. Cool. Moving on. What is your preferred form of physical activity? What do you enjoy doing? Just a couple people. Just blurt it out. Running. Hiking. Golf, love you. Biking. Walking, dancing, gardening. Anybody else? The reason that is because that's what you're going to gravitate towards too. Everybody okay with that? So if you're physically active, my mom and I've already mentioned her, we used to get in this argument all the time when I was a young man growing up. She's the one that would turn the dirt for the entire garden. It was a half acre. She would turn the dirt. That's how crazy she is. Okay, so the point I'm trying to get to is, Mom, that's not exercise. Come hang out with me. Oh my God, this hurts. So what I wanted to start to understand is what is it that you are going to try and do? What do you want to include? Whether it's dancing with your spouse or cycling or going for a great hike or whatever that happens to be, it matters very little to me. Whatever that is, because I want you to enjoy physical activity. So if I was your trainer and you were my client, that's one of the first conversations I'm having with you is what is it that you enjoy? Okay? Next one on the list. I love this question, and this is just me being snarky, right? Why do some people do and most people don't? We know it's good.
Exactly what you said. Hard.
What's that? It's difficult. It's very, very difficult. And that's what's on. And one of my favorite Arthur Jones quotes, if you enjoy exercise, you're probably doing it wrong. And I love that quote because it's meant to be challenging. It's meant to be difficult. So this is what we got to work through. But what's really funny is I'm in a department where everybody who walks through my door loves or enjoys exercise. That's why we're SES majors. We're a little bit crazy, and we know this. So what we're trying to do is say, okay, what is it that we like? Now we got to go talk to other majors because they don't like it. And so like you got to put your argument together so you can go have that conversation. The other thing that I propose when I talk to my students is, here's your sale. This is what you need to sell. If you're really diligent with your exercise program, 4 weeks from now, you might feel a difference in the way you move, the way your body feels. You might feel a difference in 4 weeks if you're highly dedicated. In 8 weeks, somebody who knows you well, intimately, they're going to start to notice a difference. In 3 months from now, 12 weeks, the average individual who knows you or is associated with you will start to recognize a difference. So here's the sales pitch. In 3 months, if you work really hard, you'll see a difference. And I'll say this to my class. I said, now go sell that. Go try to sell that, because in today's world, we want results by yesterday. It's really difficult to have somebody buy. I saw an infomercial one time. They said I could get my results by yesterday. There's no cutting corners this and that. You just got to understand that there's a little bit of a grind mentality we have to adopt to get what we want out of this. Everybody okay with what I just did? All right, moving on. Here's the big one for me, guys. Is health enough of a reason? Now, the one thing I will tell you, if you've had a catastrophic event in your life, health is the reason. Does that make sense? Those people are usually highly motivated. They usually make tremendous amount of difference in their physical being. Joe, the gentleman that I spoke to about earlier, he was given weeks, months to live, and 15 years later, he's living large still. So we know that exercise has that kind of potential. Not for everybody, but it has that kind of potential if we're dedicated to it. But for most of us, we're like, I'm doing okay. I really don't need to work that hard. Fair enough? And so health, per Dr. Michelle Seeger, states is not enough of a reason. It's not enough of a reason for us to continue to exercise on a regular basis. That one upset me. It was very, very difficult because, as I mentioned, since I was 18, 20 years of age, I've always believed that health was enough of a reason. So when I got into her research and started reading, she's a behavior psychologist, I was a little bit disturbed. I was frustrated by that because I felt like, damn it, she's wrong. But her research is pretty substantial.
I mean, I think you just have to look around.
How so?
I mean, just look at how many people are not healthy.
Fair enough.
They're not even motivated to do anything
Well,
or make the changes.
so motivation is part of it, but we usually, if you talk to individuals, we had an individual in the first, he had a health scare. He's been real dedicated for about 2 years now. He's in a much different place as a result of. And so when we start looking at what is that event that puts you over the top, that's now keeping you consistent, that overcomes the, I don't really want to do that. That's the question that I'm trying to figure out. Like, not just for myself. I'm my number one guinea pig, but I'm trying to put this in your brain to where you kind of go, I don't know, maybe just making a little bit of sense right now.
Who was the lady you referred to?
Dr. Michelle Seeger is her name. All right. So when we look at health, when we actually analyze health as our reason, there are two lists that we want to work with. One is the health-related components of physical fitness, and the other is the skill-related components of physical fitness. Okay, so what I have here is on the left column, cardiovascular endurance, muscle strength, muscle endurance, flexibility, and composition, body composition, so body fat percentage. This is the byproduct of a regular physical activity program or regular physical fitness. When I first started as a young man back in the late 80s, early 90s, when I started back then, cardiovascular was strongly influenced by a gentleman by the name of Dr. Kenneth Cooper out of Dallas, Texas. He was kind of the authority he took the lead of this whole concept of exercising for the health of it. And coming out of college, I was there. I mean, it made sense to me. I actually had the opportunity to do some stuff under his, not directly under him, but as a part of his institute and blah, blah, blah. And so I immediately adopted cardiopulmonary system, cardiovascular endurance. This is the where we need to start. And I was there for many, many years. But then one day I did something where it was very, very strange for me, as I started to look at cardiovascular endurance influencing the rest of that list, the other 10 components, if you will. Because the one thing I know about you as human beings, you specifically, and you generally, the thing that I know about you all is that if I tried to do all 11 of these things exactly at the same time, I lost you. You're not coming back. You're like, that boy's crazy. I am not going to go hang out with him anymore. So I know that if whatever program we start you on, we got to kind of wade you into the shallow end, let you get acclimated to the water, and then you can start to figure things out and work with your trainer or your staff or what's going on. If I just take you and throw you into the deep end of freezing cold water, you're not coming back. So the idea behind this is I want to figure out what's the most important thing that I need to integrate into your body, if you will, your petri dish, who you are as a person. What am I going to introduce to get the biggest bang for my buck? Everybody okay with this? Here's the thing I know. If you want to change the composition of your body, diet's the most important thing you can do. Most of you will not change your diet until your body doesn't perform accurately or perform well. What I mean by this is you will not change your diet until you stress it with exercise and realize, oh my gosh, this isn't going well for me. And what I mean by that is, it's a bad analogy, but work with me. If you take a high performance car and you put really bad gas in it and then go try to drive at a high rate of speed, it's not going to go well. It's going to knock and ping and chug. It's the same thing with your body. Your body will run on bad gas, but it's not going to be optimal. Everybody okay with me? So when I work with individuals, what I'm trying to do for you or with you is increase your efficiency. I want to improve your efficiency. So you burn more calories just existing, okay? So when I looked at cardiovascular endurance on muscle strength, stays the same or goes down. Muscle endurance stays about the same, okay? When I look at cardiovascular endurance and fluid on flexibility, flexibility significantly diminishes. All you have to do is watch a cross-country runner versus a sprinter in track and field. Watch what happens to their hips. A cross-country runner starts to limit their ability, where sprinters get real high and up and through. Everybody with me on this? So if I'm constantly moving within a very short range of motion, contractures and limitation in that range of motion start to present themselves long term. Okay? Body composition, this one's really strange. We think if we do tons of cardio, our body comp is going to change significantly. It does not. It's a term called skinny fat. Okay? Your composition is exactly the same, but you are thinner. Is that fair to everybody? So we are burning more calories, but we are not changing the composition of our body. The ratios stay virtually the same. And that's something we really need to explore. And so it's one of those where, and here's where it gets even really tricky. I'm 50 now, and one of my best friends, his wife is a cardio bunny. You guys know what I'm talking about? The ones that come in, get on the street, they're there for like 45 minutes, they towel off, they get right back on, they go. If you walk up, and you'd have to ask Terry for permission, but if you kind of smack her on the bottom, she's got no muscle density at all. Because what happens is that level of cardio consistently starts to eat up the muscle proteins. Everybody with me on this? So the quality of the muscle is not there, and that's why your composition pretty much remains the same. Everybody okay with what I just said?
So to clarify that, presumably someone's doing that and they're losing weight. So they're losing fat and losing muscle.
Their whole composition, everything's kind of reducing it the same, unless you're trying to, there's ways around that, but the average person, what I just said is a very true statement. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. When I go to the other side, which is the skill related, okay, and I told you guys I worked with athletes, so I got to get over there. If you came and trained with me, I would treat each and every one of you as an athlete. That's just my mentality when you walk into my weight room, okay? So agility, cardiovascular, actually diminishes it, okay? Balance, stays the same or slightly lower. Coordination has a lot to do with mom and pops and the genetics that you have. Has a lot to do with your neuromuscular interaction. Power Strength is the base of power, so cardiovascular, if muscle strength's not doing anything, it stays down. Quickness diminishes. Speed diminishes. You can see where I'm at? So when I start looking at this, I went, that's not my biggest bang for the buck. That's not going to do the majority of what I want it to do. So I looked at this list, played lottery, spun it a couple times, turned it upside down, and came back to it, and I went, you know what? What if we looked at muscle strength first? What if we could magically, like a video game, install strength in your body? How would that change you or the way you move? Everybody okay with what I'm doing, the way I'm thinking here? All right, so muscle strength to cardiovascular endurance. Cardiovascular endurance is influenced by two different mechanisms. One is your cardiopulmonary system, and the other is actually at the local level, which is the muscular diffusing oxygen across the tissue. If you increase your strength, you improve your ability to diffuse oxygen. What actually happens is type 1 fiber starts to, type 1s get more proficient, and type 2As actually start to become more prevalent in your body. That's science, and I apologize, but what it does is it changes how your muscles use oxygen at the local level. Therefore, what it does is it raises your VO2 max, which is how you utilize oxygen as a human being. Next one on the list, muscle strength and muscle endurance. They're directly correlated. As you get stronger, your muscle endurance goes up. More specifically, what it addresses is your strength to body weight ratio. Okay, you get stronger to carry your body around. That is a tremendous variable, and it'll pop up here again. Next one up here, muscle strength and flexibility. If you work through full range of motion and you're taking the joints through that full range of motion and you're increasing strength, flexibility goes up. Just happens. Okay, next one up here. Muscle strength and body composition will significantly influence the composition of your body. You will add muscle, and that muscle will burn. There you go. It'll burn the fat, okay?
When you add the muscle, do you add the weight also?
You will add weight, but your composition. So yes, to answer your question, first name? Al. Al's right. Damn it. Al's right, and what I mean by that is you might, I've seen this happen. I watched one of my very first clients, she dropped several dress sizes, pant sizes, put on 6 pounds and quit because the bathroom scale was, so I'm like, but darn it, you look, okay, all right, go see somebody else. So just don't quit exercise. So you're 100% correct. The scale may not be the number you want it to be, but the composition of the body or the look or the shape or the ability, and I'm more of a function guy. So if I put on a couple pounds on you and you are functioning better, I feel like I did my job, and I'll give myself reward. All right, so body composition, strength to agility. Agility's got to be there, but if strength is there, it changes significantly. Everybody okay? Balance. We did this study on campus. I asked this question, what's the least amount of time somebody can spend in my weight room and see significant benefits? Average age of the study was 78 years of age. The oldest participant was 91. What we did was we walked them into our weight room, we put them on a recumbent cycle. Average body takes 7 minutes to break a sweat. We would pedal them, we got them heated up, we put them on the leg press, we did 1 set for a warm-up, acclimation to the machine, and we did a 2nd set to near fatigue or as close to fatigue as we could get them. From there, we walked them out in the hallway, we walked them up and down to where we felt comfortable enough for them to walk out in the parking lot on their own recognizant, and we monitored the data. Everybody good with what I just said? The number one variable for fall prevention amongst the elderly is single leg stance. When we started, the individuals in the study could not hold on average 4 seconds. They could not stand on one leg for 4 seconds. By the end of the study, which was 8 weeks, we've increased strength by almost 70%, and we increased balance by over 400%. Okay. What that tells you, or what I learned from it, is strength is definitely a component of balance. Everyone in this room knows how to stand on one leg. What factors is not the skill, it is the strength of balance. You're not strong enough to be able to support that center of mass in that position. So we'll get back to skill and strength here in just a little bit. Power or coordination, very, very much mom and pops. The genetics of your family and handed down coordination is very much a skill oriented, and strength will influence it, but it only influences as much as that coordination is already there. Everybody okay with what I just did? Power, you have to have strength before you have power. You have to have strength before you have power. Now, power is significant amongst my elderly. My grandmother, for example, is somebody who we had to do a fall assessment on her because she's a weeble wobble. I say it to her face, I'm not making fun behind her back. But what I mean by that is she's somebody who's likely to fall down, and we had to do a full fall assessment on her. And what we had to do is we had to make sure that she had the strength necessary to be able to support her body. And I'll mention her again in just a little bit. Quickness, when I work with athletes, it's called reaction time. It also goes back to your neurological system, but if strength's not there, it's not going to happen. And then speed is very much a skill, very, very, very much a skill. But when you install strength behind it, you will see significant changes. All right, my training philosophies that I've adopted over the years. The very first thing that I want anybody I work with is do something. I don't care what it is. I want you to find something that is physical that makes you feel good. Because if you feel good, there's a good chance I'm going to see you a couple more times. Okay? So when I do a project in one of my classes, it's called the workout journal. I tell my class, put yourself on a workout program. I want you to be the trainer and the client. And the main reason that I do this is so they can hear all those excuses going on between their ears. You guys know what I'm talking about? That self-dialogue of why you don't want to do it on that particular day. And I want them to experience that. But the main reason I do it is because I want them to have that moment where, like, what do I put in an exercise program? Most of my students are athletes, and someone's always programmed for them. They've never had the opportunity to sit down and put something together for anyone. And oftentimes what they'll do when we start this program is they just start doing what everybody else has told them to do. They haven't actually thought about it outside of the confines of somebody programming for them. So I tell them point blank, right off the bat, with this assignment, you will do something. I don't care what it is. It just has to be physical, okay? So is it Pilates, yoga, dance, hiking, golf? I don't care. What I want you to do is get your body moving. Now I've got, 20 to 22-year-old kids that are sedentary, that are SES majors. Come on, there's a little oxymoron in that. But that's what I'm dealing with. So part of my objective is just to make sure that they're trying something. I also put these other quizzes on there. They're called take-home quizzes or experiential learning. Go take a class that you're uncomfortable with. Go take a group exercise class that makes you uncomfortable. Okay? And the reason that I do this is because I want them to feel uncomfortable walking into the room, because we tend to gravitate towards things that make us comfortable, and we don't want to be uncomfortable. So here's somebody who thinks they're an exercise expert walking into a yoga class where the average age is probably 50 to 55, and those people are turning around and making fun of the new kid. And that's what I want them to experience, is like, that's exactly what it feels like for somebody else to walk into our strength domain. And so these are just my opportunities to kind of mess with their head a little bit. All right. Once you do something, my next objective is not for you not to get hurt. I don't want you to get hurt doing exercise. I want to minimize that risk. That's what my objective is. One of the things that, per my evidence, per my anecdotal, per my research, per my lit reviews, everything, it all kind of started pointing back to maintaining or increasing strength parameters. Okay? So if you are strong, you are less likely to be injured. Everybody okay with what I just said? It's less likely to happen. Now here's the better part. If you are injured and you are strong, you will bounce back quicker. Your bounce back ability is shortened. Okay, so you're not down for as many days or as many weeks or as much time. And when you start to ask doctors or physicians like I have had, if you take somebody who's highly fit, what is the recovery time for this versus the average individual? And it'll be weeks, sometimes months, okay? So I feel very comfortable. Don't get hurt. We're looking at maintaining strength for the purposes of injury minimization or bounce back ability. And I think I just made up a word, okay? All right, stability versus mobility. Absolutely, hands down, this is one of my favorites to look at. When I work with people, I want to increase stability in your body. Each and every one of your joints in the plane of motion that it moves, in the joint actions that it produces. I want to maintain what's called joint integrity. I want that joint to function as it is supposed to. One of the most difficult to work with is the shoulder. John mentioned it earlier. You have a humeral head and a glenoid cavity. Glenoid cavity is very small in comparison to the humeral head. Therefore, it is an engineering feat to keep that thing stuck together the way it's supposed to. It really, really is. So I'm looking at joint stability through strength training, but on the flip side of that, or as part of that equation, I got to maintain mobility in your joints. Because if you start to lose range of motion, you're going to start what's called compensatory movement. You're going to start to change the way you're moving, very subtle at first, and then it becomes almost a detriment before you realize what's going on. So I want to make sure that when I work with my individuals that they are maintaining stability, strength, and maintaining or improving flexibility for mobility purposes. Everybody good with this? Okay. So if we start looking at, say, performance, I use these exact same parameters on my athletes. If I'm working with a golfer and they don't have the mobility to get the hip turn, I already know they're going to compensate before they get to impact. Okay, so it's the same exact argument. I just looking at a different athlete. Everybody okay? Next one up, skill versus strength. This is a really fun argument for me because right now there's tons of people out there who are experts in fitness and strength. Okay, I can break things down incredibly quick because I look at it. Is it a strength exercise or is it a skill exercise? Okay, I will, if you love something that I would deem as skill, I want to make sure you have the strength, okay? So if there's something out there that you love doing, do you have the strength to be able to do it the way you want to do it? Does that make, that's kind of bad English, but work with me for a second. Because what'll happen is if you have a particular something, let's say it's a golf swing. If you have the golf swing, but you don't have the strength, what'll start to happen is a compensatory or a pathological movement that'll eventually lead to injury, okay? Maybe not today or tomorrow, but eventually it'll happen. I've seen it in young ages as well as in elderly population. So what I want to make sure that happens is when I do an assessment on you and you tell me what you love, what I'm going to start to do is I'm going to look at skill, strength, and see where we need to spend our time. Everybody okay with that? Now, from there, what it starts to work into what is called the force velocity curve. And it actually transposes into what's called rate of force development. There's a whole bunch of science that goes behind that in the decision-making process. Not for today, but eventually, hopefully, if I get to come back, we'll play with this concept, okay? Next one up on here. This is probably my favorite variable to work with. Are you strong enough to support your body weight? It's a very simple concept, very, very simple concept. It's very difficult to understand this, but it's one of those that I want you to understand is walking a flight of stairs, up or down, okay? Picking something up, moving certain things. Like, are you strong enough to be able to do this? Because if you're not, what are you going to do? Exactly. There's a really, really good chance. So even when I work with my athletes, are they strong enough to support the movement they need to perform in their field of choice? Field, diamond, court, track, or pitch. What is it that they are doing, and do they have the strength necessary? Are they strong enough to move their body weight? Now let me change something real quick here, just so we're all on the same page. I'm not talking about hypertrophy. Hypertrophy is muscle growth, muscle size. And in fact, I purposely, when I work with my athletes, try to minimize hypertrophy. I do not hypertrophy train with my athletes at all. Because you tell me one sport outside of linemen and football where hypertrophy really, really matters. You really can't. And here, rugby, those guys are impressive. That's a whole different, that's something, I don't know what's going on there, but rugby's really impressive. One of my favorites, throws in track and field, they tend to be fairly large individuals. But you'll find that to be really good in throws, you have to be highly technical, very, very technical. We had an All-American at WT that you never would have picked him out of alignment as somebody who was throwing shot put, and he was really impressive when you got to see him, and he was just technically sound. So I look at the strength to body ratio. The last thing I want you guys to understand, this is not necessarily my area of expertise, but it's something that I have to acknowledge in this particular discussion. Strength increases your metabolism. It's not even a question. As you get stronger, your body just metabolizes more efficiently. You burn more calories just to exist. You have to take less medication if you are metabolically sound. So you're not on as many drugs. Do not take yourself off of drugs because of something I said. Please don't do that. I'm not a doctor. I just play one in my office. But the point I'm trying to get to is that for the most part, using myself as an example, I'm hypothyroid. When I'm on exercise or off exercise, my body will start to fluctuate in how much medication I actually need to take. And that's just one example, but I'm sure if you talk to your physicians about it, you will find that to be a very true statement. As your body starts to change or evolve with increased strength, you will start to see the medication gets to where it's supposed to get more efficiently. Everybody okay with that? And I'm not too far out of bounds. All right, moving on. All right, the two main reasons that I have witnessed that the majority of the people quit, the two most that I have personally witnessed, number one is joint pain. Joint pain is debilitating and it will stop you from regular exercise, okay? If you are hurting, you're less likely to go to or continue to. You will modify, you will change, you'll do something different. It's just one of those things as a professional, when I started my career, just started to recognize that I've got to figure out ways to minimize joint pain because I don't want to lose client or, well, selfishly, but more specifically, I don't want somebody to get hurt on my watch. So I always do low risk exercises for high reward. I do this with my athletes as well. I'm not going to take risk with them in my weight room so they can maybe get a couple of percentages of an increased vertical jump, for example, if they're volleyball players. I'm going to do low risk exercises with the purposes of installing strength so they can utilize that strength per the sport they want to play, okay? So joint pain is the number one thing that I try to prevent when I work with people. I want to minimize this to the best of my ability. Now, if you walk in with joint pain, we've got to have a conversation. If you're walking in and we've got some stuff that we're dealing with, you know, is it the big one right now, that the reason John and I are having the conversation is because of glute strength. It's amazing if sitting is the new smoking, right? That's the statement that's out right now. Sitting is the new smoking. And that means that we're going to have a host of stuff because we sit too much. When you sit too much, that glute elongates. When it elongates, it stops firing properly. So we have to maintain, I'm talking about your bottoms right now, but we have to maintain a way of keeping that glute to continue to fire. So if we protect either upstream, low back pain, or downstream foot and knee problems. Does that make sense to everybody? So joint pain is one that I pay attention to. The next one on the list is psychological burnout. I've seen this happen way too many times. And we talk about the individual who's the casual exerciser. They just get to a point where I just don't want to do this crap anymore. Probably one of the funniest stories that I've ever experienced. I was very young. I was probably about 20, 21 years of age. I was just starting out my first training job. I was in a gym. I was super excited, and I get assigned this woman that to work out. So I put her up on the bike, and I get her going, and she looks at me about 5 minutes into her cycling, and she goes, "Do you actually like this crap?" And I went, she didn't say crap, by the way. Her word started with an S. And the reason that I mention that is because it caught me so far off guard, but I always remember that. I'm like, you know, maybe I don't know, I wasn't ready for that. I mean, it happened early, and so I had to formulate, and we got to have a real good conversation, and she's like, my friends love it, but I'm not there. And I went, all right, okay, let's reorganize this. Let's think about this a little bit. And she eventually decided that she could fake it for a while, and we worked on it, and then she held strong for a while. So I go back to this idea that exercise is a medication. I take my medication a minimum of twice a week for about 30, 35 minutes. That's what I do, okay? That's what makes the most amount of sense to me. You don't know this, but I have a 3.5-year-old. My whole objective is to see as much of her life as I can. She's my first and only, and I'm a little bit late in the game, and my goal is to be able to be around for as long as possible. That's my training, that's my why. But that is my medication, and so I know that I need to maintain strength to be able to interact with her life for as long as I can, okay? Everybody good with this? Okay, moving on. Okay, training for strength. This is a very basic philosophy that I utilize for everyone that I work with. You have to have enough stimulus to cross a threshold to put the muscle into recovery for the purposes of adaptation. It's a very simple formula. If you don't cross that threshold, you're not in recovery and you will see absolutely no change. It's called and I hate to do this, I don't want to get too big workout. Everybody knows what I'm talking about. If I had a nickel, a dollar for every time I've heard that in my lifetime, I would be on an island. They'd be serving me drinks with umbrellas. Okay, and the reason is because people, I tell you what, I got to a place where I'll pay you $1,000 if you get too big. I'll pay you cash money if you get too big. And so the reason I do this is because most people, when they go to the weight room, they do not add enough stimulus to get that muscle to go into recovery. And that's what happens. And so we're spending a lot of time in the weight room going, well, nothing's changing. Well, we're not getting you close enough to that threshold. We're not getting you up to that point where your muscle's like, we need to go sit down for a little bit because you just tuckered us out. Okay, so once I get you to cross that threshold, once I get you there, then I got to make sure we have proper recovery on the backside of that threshold. We got to get some sleep, we got to get some hydration, we got to get some nutrition. Okay? And so if you're crossing that threshold and that recovery's not there, you also are starting that process of detraining. Does that make sense? It's too much for your body. So the nutrition plays a tremendous amount of this. If you're not getting enough sleep, all this kind of factors into this idea of recovery. But if our goal is adaptation, you got to go through the first two. They got to be there. If they are not, then we're going to have a different discussion. We're going to have to figure out a way to get you to understand that. Now, the stimulus is different for each and every one of you in this room. Stimulus has a lot to do with genetics. Stimulus has a lot to do with your training background. Stimulus has a lot to do with your pain thresholds. There's a lot of difference between what that threshold is for you. But you've got to get that muscle to a place where it's like, we're tuckered, we're done, okay? And for all of that, slightly different. And once you find it, once you learn it, it becomes easier and easier to take the muscle to that level. But that is kind of the foundation behind Strength Sciences Studios in terms of making sure that you're crossing or getting up to that level of stimulus each and every time that you venture into the building. Everybody good? Okay. So when you start looking at aerobic or cardiovascular programming, when you start to look at this concept of walking, if left alone and you were told to exercise, most of you are probably going to gravitate towards this concept of walking or some level of cardiovascular. Not all of you, and I'm generalizing right now to prove my point. But what I'm trying to get you to understand is that we've been told that walking is good. It is. I'm not going to say it's not. I want you to do something, okay? But when you walk, how close to that threshold do you actually get? You see where I'm at? So that's the key that I want you to understand. Walking is good, physical activity is good, but do you get those muscles or your system to that threshold? And that's for you to answer. I don't know, I'm not there with you. If you want me to go walk with you, we can do that, okay? Let me change my shoes. But the point I'm trying to get to is that we have to understand that cardiovascular exercise is good. I'm not saying that it's not, please know that. But do we actually get to this level of crossing a threshold for purposes of adaptation? I will tell you point blank that if you strength train and do your walking program, what you improve is called your walking economy. You will find that you walk a much further distance in a very short period of time in comparison, and you don't feel like you're walking any faster. That's the really cool part about this, is that if you understand that concept, strength matters tremendously for cardiovascular exercise because it helps at the local level. It helps with strength to body weight ratio. And those are the reasons that it helps. The next one up here is aerobic or strength program. I know that I can make you really uncomfortable by pushing you all the way to that threshold. And I can do it in a safe environment that involves an exercise piece of equipment. You're stabilized. We're not doing anything risky. We're trying to figure out what muscles we need to turn on and get them activated. So when I work with individuals, I focus on technique, and there's a two-step process in my world. Technique is, does it look correct? Does it physically look correct? Okay? And I've spent a lot of my life analyzing technique because of what I've done for a living. We put markers on bodies and we analyze movement. That's what I do for a living. The second part of technique is the harder part, which is, are you feeling it in the right muscle? Is the right muscle fatiguing? Is it starting to get tired as you're lifting? What's really fun for me is, I'll never forget this. I was working with a young lady. We were working on squats, and I was like, where are you feeling that right now? My big toe. I had nothing. I didn't even know where to go with that. Hold on a second. We got to go all the way back to the beginning. And so you get some strange responses, but ultimately I need to know, are you experiencing where you're supposed to experience that level of discomfort or that level of pain? Are we taxing the right muscles? Everybody okay with that? So that's the way I look at this stuff. There's two concepts here. Most of you, if you have lifted weights, are probably on a load-based program. Okay? And that's interested in how much weight you lift. I don't care. I do not care whatsoever. One of my favorite quotes is by a gentleman by the name of Lee Haney. He was one of those individuals who's on stage, very large human being, very muscular. And he said this quote, and I love him for saying it. I can make any weight feel heavy. Does that make sense? If you understand that concept, you just entered into what's called the effort-based program. It's based on your effort and how close you can get to that MVF or that level of fatigue. MVF is momentary volitional fatigue. How close can you get to that threshold? How close can you make that happen? When Lee Haney said that, I was like, damn, that's beautiful. That's absolutely gorgeous. Thank you for saying that. Because it puts it in perspective. Most of the high school programs, you get your name on the wall if you bench press a certain amount of weight. What's funny about that? On record, John McBride, who's probably the #1 strength coach in the nation, bench press is the most overrated lift in the weight room. Wait, what? So when we start to understand the way we're organized, there's a lot of stuff that's wrong. So I always look at programs right off the bat. Is it effort-based or is it load-based? Overwhelmingly, it's load-based. I don't care how much weight you lift. What I care is the quality of movement and how close you can get to fatigue with the current weight that is on there. Everybody good? If I'm looking for a rep zone in the 15 range or the 20 range or the 5 range, I'm going to start adjusting accordingly as your trainer, and you're going to start to just give me as much effort as you can with good technique. As soon as you break technique, we're done. We're done. We did enough. We got you right up to that threshold. Moving on. All right, guys, we're going to transition just a little bit. We're going to take everything we just talked about, we're going to drop it over into elderly falls. So what you see up on the board here is a grouping of elderly falls. I just need to point this out to you guys. This is one of my areas of specialty. Elderly falls is multidimensional. It's multifactorial. It is way bigger than me. It will always be bigger than I am. And it essentially comes down to many, many different factors. But what I had to do is to figure out, what does a fall prevention program look like? I volunteered to be part of what is called the Solano County Fall Prevention Program. It was a very, very cool experience. I got to walk into a room where I was the only biomechanist. Everybody in the room came at this meeting from a totally different point of view. And what this point of view was about was hospital administrators, EMTs, fire department, community dwelling individuals, hospitalization, nursing homes. All of this was in one room. There's probably about 30 people. I just got to listen. I was the fly on the wall and listening to how everybody spoke about elderly fall prevention or minimization from their point of view. It was probably one of the best learning experiences I've ever had. And then eventually I spoke up, and everyone kind of like, we didn't know you had an opinion. But what it comes down to is, how can I contribute to the argument? How can I contribute to the success of minimization of falls? And so what I fall under is I fall under exercise recommendations. That's my area of specialty, and trying to help people understand that exercise can be a medicine in this particular area. So when you look at the literature, the very first thing that'll usually pop up is cardio. I'm walking, I'm going for a walk. Great, we're doing something, meets the first criteria of what I want you to do. Second on the list is usually strength, which is where my focus is now in trying to understand how strength. One of the main reasons is because you're supported. When you're out walking, if you have a moment of instability, you're on the sidewalk somewhere. Make sense? So I know that I can increase your strength in a safer environment, lower risk, and it will enhance your walking ability. Next on the list is mobility. We've already talked about it. Next on the list is your gait parameters. It's a skill development, how you actually walk. Do we need to look at the way you walk to make some appropriate changes or start to work on, is it a skill thing or is it a strength thing? I had to learn to re-walk. I tore my Achilles tendon, okay? So learning to walk up and down stairs, there was a lot of bad words coming out of my mouth, okay? It was very, very difficult. So I understand the concept of re-gait or relearning. Next one on the list is balance. Balance is tremendous. There's a professor, love her last name, it's Pineapple. Marjorie Pineapple is her name. But what she does is she looks at balance training from skill. I look at balance training from strength. So we're opposite ends. Both are successful, okay? And so it lets you understand that there's more than one way to do this. I'm just letting you know that when you add strength to the skill of balance, it makes more of a difference. Is that fair, what I just said? The other one thing in the literature that pops out again and again and again is this concept of Tai Chi. Okay, if you've never tried it, if you've never played with it, give it a shot, just for giggles. Pull up, YouTube, it's a leading authority never mind. But pull one up and you'll see what I'm talking about. What Tai Chi does, it takes your center of mass, which is somewhere behind your belly button, and what you do is you take your center of mass and you push it all the way out to the edge of your base of support, and then you lift one foot. Now I'm in single leg stance, the only balance measurement that actually successfully predicts whether you're going to fall or not. Then you move out into the next, push all the way to the edge, and single leg stance. Is it a little goofy looking? Yeah. Is it a bad dance move? Probably. But the idea behind it is it helps with this idea of skill-related center of mass over base of support for the purposes of maintaining or improving balance. That works. So understanding all this, I have a very small sliver in this pie. A very, very small sliver. And what that means is I can contribute, but I'm always going to be limited in my contribution because there's other arguments that are going to pop into this. Next one I have to address. This is not my area. This is psychology. I'm not a psychologist. I kind of play one in my office. But the fear of falling is crippling. Just the development of the fear. If you have a friend who's fallen, or if you've fallen yourself and you start to limit or delimit your activity, as soon as you start to delimit your activity, what we start to see is you start to see changes and strength changes, and it's a detriment. It starts to be a downward spiral. So all the numbers up here are current, but the thing that I want to propose here is the only way that I know how to get over the fear of failure or fear of falling is to work on strength so that that fear isn't so crippling. Is that fair? Yep. It's continuing to fight without putting yourself in situations where you may be subjected to that fall. I'm going to get you stronger. We're going to work on some of that single leg balance, Tai Chi, and then what we're going to do is start to move you into where you're not afraid, or you're not going to take those, you're more willing to take that chance. Everybody okay with that? But I have to acknowledge this is a real thing, okay? Next one on the list. no matter how you slice this, we've got about a 20-25% chance of decreasing someone's ability or chances of falling. No matter whatever you do, no matter how you slice this, whatever you put down, you have somewhere in the ballpark of about 25%, okay? So if we change your strength parameters, that's about what we're gonna do. But, and it doesn't matter if you're looking in the ballpark of Tai Chi or strength, gait retraining, it all kind of comes under this idea of around 25%, okay? All right, risk factors. The ones that I want to point out is the second one down. If you have hip weakness, instability, or unstable balance, and you're on 4 or more medications, if you have all 3 of those, there is a 100% chance you will fall in the next 12 months. Okay, if you have all 3 of those. Okay, if you have none of them, there's still a 12% chance it could happen. What that tells you is that falls amongst the elderly is kind of 2 ends of the continuum. On one end we have the frail, and on the other end we have the highly active. So both are likely to fall, but the ones that I pay more attention to are kind of on the frail end. If you're the highly active, high five, let's go for a hike. Okay? And so what I mean by this is that of those 3, I can specifically address 2 of them as a strength conditioning guy, as somebody who's in the profession. I can't mess with your medication. I'm not qualified. But I know for a fact that if I start looking at your hip weakness, I make a machine now. You guys will have it soon. And if I address the unstable balance, I already know that strength's a major part of that. And then we start working on some of your balance issues or some stability issues. Everybody good there?
How are you saying that? You're saying that the more medications that you're taking increases your likelihood of fall?
Yeah, yes, sir. I'll just use my grandma as an example. When we did a fall assessment on her, she was on 13 medications. She was a walking cocktail, a walking pharmacy. And what we found out was when I went and did the consultation for her prescriptions, she was on 3 tiers of medication. The last tier was to combat the side effects of the first tiers, and it was causing a mixture in her body that was actually making her incredibly unstable. So in addition to that, they found out she was clumsy, okay? But we took her, I'm sorry. I'll let you what, you can call my grandma and tell her I'm making fun of her. But the point is what we found out is that we got her down to about 5 or 6, and some of that side effects of being dizzy was starting to subside. And so she was more confident because of the fear of falling. We worked on her strength, and there were some things that we had to change, and I worked real hard to help her not fall down, and consequently she hasn't had as many. Are you good? Is that good? Okay. So yes, medication does play, and it has a lot to do with the mixing in the body in terms of side effects and how that's affecting our ability. All right, guys, here we go. This is kind of the crux of what my research says. All right. So if you're 65 to 69, there's a 1 out of 200 chances, 200 walking opportunities you'll fall down. That's kind of what the numbers are. If you're 85 plus, it's 1 in 10. Okay. So, and these are hip fractures, suffering hip fractures. Now, hip fractures are significant because if you sustain a hip fracture, quality and quantity of life will significantly diminish thereafter. I hate to say it that way, but them are facts. So 80% of hip fractures happen in the female population. Sorry about that, okay? So from there, what we have is we start looking at kind of, wait a minute, how do we address this? What do we do? And this is me running through probably, I don't know, 50 or so articles and trying to understand how this all fits together. So work with me for just a second. As we go from 65 to 85 years of age, our gait speed diminishes by approximately 25%. The average person, when they walk, is about 1.5 meters per second. That's about 3.3 miles per hour. That's average, okay? For you to interact with society, go out, walk in the streets. We just went downtown and had lunch. There's a lot going on down there. To interact with society, you need to be able to walk at least 1.2 meters per second. Otherwise, the light's going to change on you. Something's going to go. You're going to probably get caught in a bad place in the worst way. So what we found was at 1.0 meters per second, it's a critical threshold. And what happens at 1 meter per second is we stop falling on the top part. It's real hard to see, and I apologize, but if you look at the very top one, If someone's walking 1.5 and they slip, trip, or fall, they're going to go forward and they're going to catch themselves, and if they're going to fracture, it's going to be a wrist. It's called a collar fracture. Okay? If you get at 1 meter per second, there's no guarantee that you're going to fall this direction. What will happen at 1 meter, if you get 1 meter per second, if you get unstable, there's a chance you may go laterally or posteriorly. Laterally, you're going to contact GT, greater trochanter. Posterior, that bone that you're sitting on right now, is called your ischial tuberosity. That right there is enough to send enough force through the system to actually cause a fracture in the hip. Okay, so this, we know this, okay? So 1 meter is that threshold. 0.8, it's almost guaranteed you're going to fall laterally posterior. The chances are at 0.6, you're going to probably land on your bottom when you fall. Okay, and that's what we found in the literature. What's cool about the study that we did on campus, the one where they had to improve their balance, every single individual in the study that had gait speeds of less than 1 meter per second all increased their gait up to almost 1.2. We did not teach them how to walk. We did nothing with their gait. We just pre-tested and post-tested. It was a byproduct. We weren't even looking for that. But just by changing their strength parameters, they already knew how to walk. We changed their strength, and guess what? They got above that critical threshold successfully. Everybody good there? It was, I'm gonna be honest with you, I was thrilled. Uh-oh, hold on, batteries are down. I'm getting excited. All right, so it was significant for me to see that happen or that take place. So here's the deal. If we're going to look at the fall mechanism, we're going to try to prevent. Now, I cannot prevent every single person from falling down, but my second objective, which is probably the more important, if you're going to fall down, I'm going to try to figure out how to minimize injury. Specifically, minimize the potential for a hip fracture. Everybody okay with what I'm saying right now? So if fall is going to occur, a slower gait speed is going to change the orientation of my fall. That's the first thing. We just know that if I can keep your speed above a certain level, you're less likely to fall in a detrimental way. The next one on the list, protective response. That is your ability to get your body in the right position so you don't impact improperly. So what I mean by that, if you slip or trip, first step is to get your foot in the right position, or whatever it happens to be. That's power. And the second part of that is to be strong enough to reverse your angular momentum, the ability to upright your body. Okay? So that's going to be protective response, directly related to your strength. Okay? Next one up here is called local shock absorption or local shock absorber. That's a really nice way to say you have more muscle on your booty. That means that you have more muscle surrounding your hip, that you have some tissue there that protects the bones so you're not making bone to floor impacts, okay? There's this whole theory about if you don't use it, you lose it. And so if you run around and patting people on the backside at a certain age, you realize that we don't have a lot of tissue back there. So what we want to try to do is maintain local shock absorbers. We want to increase more booty. John's getting a machine. Strength Science Studios is going to specifically address this issue because we have shown to put mass on someone's backside as old as 60, 70. We haven't worked with too many 80-year-olds lately. All right, so local shock absorption. Bone strength is the very last parameter that we have. And I'm going to tell you, strength makes a big difference. If you're sending load through those bones, that bone mineral density is likely to respond. Probably one of the best studies that I've ever been associated. We did an 18-month study on elderly walking. And one of the things that we looked at was bone mineral density changes over that 18 months. You need at least a 12-month study to look at bone remodeling, and we significantly changed the quality and the density of the bones using strength as a parameter. So I know for a fact that if you have stronger bones, you are much less likely to fracture if you even if you contact in the right spots. Or the wrong spots, I should say.
Is that impacted by anybody that would have, say, an arthritic hip already?
It's going to change the way they walk. So yes, that's probably should be on the list somewhere. But that's a darn good point. But yeah, because my mom's in that ballpark. My mom is rheumatoid. Yeah, my mom's rheumatoid, and she's watching her gait change over time has been difficult. But yeah, she's incredibly arthritic, and it definitely factors. And she's starting to walk a little bit wider. Okay, so we're gonna move on. All right. So if I look at elderly gait, if I'm gonna take a minute and look at elderly gait, altered gait mechanics psychologically, we've talked about the fear of falling. It changes the way we walk. If we have a fear of falling, we naturally start to widen our feet up and we take much smaller steps, okay? And that's on average. That's not everyone, but that's on average. That's what we see, and that's kind of our response. We tend to shuffle. We don't lift the feet too far from the ground, and we want to make sure if there is some level of perturbation that our foot is able to get back down in contact with the floor to protect our center of mass from going outside of our base of support. All right, next one up is physiological. Physiological, if you compare a 25-year-old and a 65-year-old, it costs about 12 to 22% more energy to walk the same distance at the same speed. So it is more difficult or more taxing on our body to walk the same distance or the same speed, okay? It costs us more energy as a result of, okay? The next one up is mechanical. Changes in gait strategy. I've already told you, or we've already talked about this. So if I'm a normal strategy at 25 years of age, walking is a series of falls and catches. You fall and you catch yourself. It's a skill. It is very, very much a skill. So in this particular case, as I fall and I go to catch, I'm plantar flexing. I'm pushing the ground down in its ankle strategy. Everybody okay with what I'm doing right here? It's an ankle movement. What starts to change in our elderly is we start to use more of a hip strategy. It's very, very normal. And you either have a hip flexion strategy or a hip extension strategy. More likely than not, it's hip flexion. Hip flexion is you're picking the foot up this way, okay? So forward progression of your center of mass becomes more of that instead of an actual plantar flexion. That change of mechanics subjects us to the potential of falls, and here's why. Our hips are the primary purpose of our hips is to carry the passenger, which is our upper body. So when we start using a hip strategy to walk, we're increasing the demand of our hip musculature, and if fatigue starts to set in, we start to weeble wobble like my grandma. She's not strong enough or is fatigued to be able to upright herself if she starts to fall. Is that fair? So changing of gait mechanics. Gait velocity we've already talked about. If it diminishes, there's our issue. Step length and step width. We don't step as long because we want to make sure we're staying in a safer, more stable environment. And if it's really bad, we start to widen up to create lateral support. Okay? Next one up, SST and DST is how much time you spend in single stance or double stance, okay? So what you see is these percentages start to significantly change as we age. We start to spend more and more time in double stance. Next one up is step frequency. You ask somebody who's already made these gait changes, and what you start to see is more of a shuffled gait if they try to walk fast. Everybody with me on this? So I'm not trying to make fun. Range of motion, we've already talked about diminishing as a result of. And the last one is probably the one that is the most fascinating to me. If I take any one of you, put you in my blacked out suits, put markers all over your body, put you on a treadmill, and I have you walk for several minutes and we collect, say, 400 or 500 strides, what we will find if we compare you to the average individual that's say 25 to 30 years of age, what we would find is your gait variability. In other words, from step to step or stride to stride is much different in comparison to what would be considered a young adult would do. In other words, their strides start to look very similar. Whereas in the age population of 65 and older, we start to see one or two strides that start to get outside of what would be repetitive. And it's really fascinating because it's one of those things that I hung out for a while and really got into the literature and trying to understand this. But that concept has really helped me to understand just because something looks appropriate doesn't mean they're using the correct muscles. Doesn't mean it's being done exactly the same on every single repetition. And that goes for our my athletes as well. It's something that really opened my mind up into what was possible in terms of what we were doing. All right, couple more slides, guys. The gentleman that I spoke of, that's Joe. That's the gentleman that stood up and took his shirt off. So at 77, that's him. So I was 20 something. You taking pictures of Joe? I'm just playing. I'm just. That's awesome. Appreciate you. So the next thing that I need you guys to understand. Next thing I understand is that when we start working with the elderly population, we have to understand that there's something called sarcopenia. Sarcopenia is called muscle wasting. It's how it translates. It's something that happens. It starts in our 30s, and we lose about 9% per decade, or about 1% a year. Now, you can fight like hell and minimize that decline. And I'm 50 now, and I'm right there. I'm on this train, I'm struggling, and I'm fighting it, okay? Because I want to be that person in the gym 20 years from now. That's what my goal is. So sarcopenia is making sure that we're sending the stimulus through the muscle to preserve it, not let it waste, okay? To the best of our ability. And that's one of the reasons why I've really gravitated towards the idea of maintaining a certain level of strength, but also maintaining this idea of stimulating the muscle for the preservation of the tissue. Fair enough to everybody? Okay, the next thing on the list is called denervation. This one was goofy for me. I'm not a muscle physiologist. This one was hard. But this is what denervation basically is. We have two different kinds of muscle types in our body. We basically have type 1, which is more oxidative or aerobic, low force but sustainable for long periods of time. And we have type 2, which is big force, power, but it doesn't last for very long, okay? So power is something that we need. But what denervation basically tells us, if you don't use it, you lose it. So what starts to happen with denervation is we start to disconnect from our type 2 fibers and reconnect with our type 1 fibers. A little bit of science. I did not believe this. I did not believe this is what was going on. When I went and pulled a bunch of articles on this one particular topic, because I was like, our body doesn't do this. But it comes back to the concept, if you don't use it, you lose it. And our body's going to start to reorganize. So when we start working to near fatigue, okay, 1 day a week, momentary volitional fatigue, one of the things that we are doing is we are preserving our type 2 fibers because we're using them to a level of exhaustion using something called the size principle or the Henneman principle, which has been around since 1938 and was confirmed in 1957. So it's a very basic law almost within the strength training industry that most people don't talk about. But it has never been disputed, it has never been questioned, but we tend to minimize it because the NSCA, the National Strength Conditioning Association, prefers something called selective recruitment, which has never been founded in literature, ever. So it's a really fascinating journey because a lot of what you know about strength training, that's one of the first forks in the road right there. And it's very, very difficult for people to wrap their brain around that. So with denervation, our body starts to disconnect from type 2 fibers if we're not using them. Fall prevention, 2 steps we've already mentioned. Exercises for fall prevention. How would you program? What would you look at? I'm a posterior chain guy based on all my research. I want to know what's going on the back side of my body. My world happens in front of me. Anteriorly, I'm pretty strong. Posterior, most people are pretty weak. So I want to look at hamstrings, calves, gastrocs, glutes, low back, because if you look at the minimization of injury, most of the time it has to do with weakness on our backside. Everybody okay with what I'm saying? Okay. All right, guys, I think it's the last slide right here. So with a proper strength program, we're going to see bone mineral density increases, which is our last line of defense. We're less likely. We're going to see increase of muscular tissue. We're going to see gait velocity stay above our critical threshold. We're going to see, which will change our type of fall or orientation of our fall. Protective responses have a better opportunity to get our body in the right position and then the momentum to reverse that momentum or that fall potential. Balance training, strength is a component or the major component of balance. If you want to improve your balance, change your strength and you'll see what happens. Last thing on this list. Knee osteoarthritis. joint pain. What happens with knee osteoarthritis, and unfortunately it happens more in our female gender population, when we interact with the ground, we push on the ground pushes back. If that force vector that's pushing back on us is outside of our knee joint, we tend to develop osteoarthritic conditions. As we develop osteoarthritic conditions, we tend to start to change the way we walk, and that osteoarthritis gets much, much worse. So it goes back to strength to body weight ratios and maintaining that as you push down, that force is pushing right back up through that joint, and you're less likely to see that instability increase within the joint. Everybody okay with that? It's a pretty advanced concept. It's just that when you break it down and you look at it, you realize it comes all the way back to strength to body weight ratio. Okay? Questions?